The Orville, New Horizons, Season 3, Episode 8, Midnight Blue. Well, this is the episode we've all been waiting for. I mean, I have a couple of things that are kind of nitpicky that I wish they'd done slightly differently, but for the most part, this is the best episode of The Orville I have ever seen.
This is why we had more critical reviews for last week's episode, because we knew they could do better. We knew if they would just take their time and explore a topic, they could do a good product.
Yep.
And they did. Across the board. Visual effects, this is easily the best thing that the Orville has done. It's just complete eye candy when you do watch this, and I'm highly recommending you do watch it. Watch it on a big screen TV. Don't watch it on a phone. They did a really great job with these effects. These look just like what you would expect going to a movie theater. I don't know where they got the money for this. I guess they saved up all their money for this one episode of special effects. But this is the episode you should watch if you like visual eye candy.
Yeah, I was very impressed. Because oftentimes I'll hear people say, oh, it was whatever.
Cinematic. It was very cinematic. And cinematic, I guess, in pop culture means it looks like video game graphics. Because Discovery, to me, people keep saying, or even Strange New Worlds, well, the stories are bad. This visual effects look great. Yeah, but to me, they don't. They look like video game. And if that's what people want to watch is video game graphics, then that's fine. I guess I like the bright colors. I guess it's a throwback to the 90s. Mm-hmm. But to me, my eyes still work. And when I look outside, things have color. And I have the TV that we've invested in brags about all the simultaneous colors that it can show. So I want to see colors. Now, I don't want to see blown out 1960s Technicolor stuff, but I still want to see colors. And Discovery and Picard, it's all these muted, everything looks kind of yellowish or grayish, depending on what way they're looking to tint the product.
Teal, gray, and orange. That's what you get on that shit.
They were in that nebula where that planet was with the female Moclans. It was just color galore. There was an immense amount of detail on the planet. This is something, as I said, you want to watch on your big screen TV. They were on this planet before in season 2, but the visual effects were nothing like this. So, this is really, really well done.
It was beautiful. Well, in this week's episode, it was time for the annual inspection of the colony of female Moclans. And this required that Moclus send an envoy and the Union send an envoy. They were supposed to tour the colony together. But that didn't happen. The Moclans showed up early, toured the colony, but then sat there in their ship, which made me wonder, what are they doing? And then, of course, Kelly and Bortis, and they brought Topa with them. They get out of their shuttle, and they just leave it sitting there all wide open. And at the time, I'm thinking to myself, I wouldn't do that because I would be afraid those Moclans would get in there and sabotage it. And lo and behold, guess what happened? We got a lot of payoff with this. We got to see Topa experiencing an entirely female Moclan society for the very first time. And we got to see her meeting her hero, Havina. That was very powerful. That was really well done. And I was completely and utterly on board right up until Havina asked Topa to do some illegal things to help transport female infants off of Moclus.
Yeah, because the agreement was, if we were remembering what they came to in the last episode where they dealt with this, is that the colony was allowed to exist, but no more Moclans could be smuggled to that planet anymore. And we find out that actually the Underground Railroad had been started back up, and that actually there were Moclans being smuggled to the planet. And she was going to use Topa as a communication route to bounce messages to their contact on Moclus.
Yeah.
To arrange pickups and deliveries of people.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with Havina starting up the Underground Railroad again. That actually made a lot of sense to me, and I would have been surprised if she hadn't. However, what bothered me was that Havina was going to use Topa to help her do this. I really wish they hadn't done that, because it felt to me like here is one decent hero that we have, and it felt to me like they went ahead and ruined her character. Because this wasn't just a character flaw. This was a big thing. She could have had one little screw up. She could have trusted the wrong person or done something else. She could have tried to involve Bortis or something like that. And she could have done something other than involving a child in her hemisphere of nefarious deeds, which again were being done for the right reasons, but again she was asking a child to do something that she shouldn't have been. And that bothered me a great deal.
I agree with you. I think the story still could have worked, but if she would have approached Bortis, who already was sympathetic to the cause, and having a fully grown adult agree to do that, I think that would have been a much more interesting...
Yeah, and it would have helped to develop Bortis' character as well. I mean, that would have been very interesting. Or even Kelly, because Kelly also stood up for Topa back at the original hearing when Topa was an infant. So it bothers me a great deal that they had Havina do that. Because again, that was a writing choice. They didn't have to do that. In fact, after Havina does that, Topa gets snatched by those other Moclans. Allegedly, the entire point of doing that was to get that information from Topa that Havina had just given to her as far as who their contact was on Moclus and the frequencies that they used to communicate. That's what they wanted from Topa. In my opinion, just as a writer myself, I would have made it so that Topa didn't actually have that information.
When you run an operation like this, you try to limit the information that any individual has. So if they do get caught, there's only so much information they can share.
Yeah, because this would have blown the entire operation out of the water, and you entrusted that information to a child. It just doesn't seem right to me. I mean, it would have been one thing if they had tricked Topa into carrying something that had, like, information inscribed on it, or, you know, something else so that Topa wasn't aware that she had all of this information. And it seemed very convenient that these Moclans just assumed that Topa had this information. I mean, what were they hiding out in the bushes when Havina told her these things? Well, if that's the case, then they didn't really need Topa, did they? They could have overheard everything anyway. So that just felt like a bit of a hole in the story. However, that being said, I'm willing to overlook that because the rest of the story was so good. And again, it's writing choices. Just because I don't like the choices that a writer made doesn't invalidate those choices.
Somebody in our last video made a comment that at least with this series, unlike the Secret Hideout Star Trek series, we can actually debate story points about, oh, this would have made more sense to do this or that. And we don't feel like insulted that we're actually discussing what could happen here.
Yeah, exactly.
So the fact that we're taking a series that started out as a parody of Star Trek and now has turned in, this episode has cemented it. This is real Star Trek. And we can actually debate, hey, it would have been better if they would have done this or that. That says how well the Orville is doing, how much better they're doing than that Secret Hideout CBS stuff, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, because at this point, I mean, I use the term real Star Trek more as Star Trek being, well, what used to be the gold standard or the Cadillac of this type of science fiction. And the reality is the Orville at this point in time has surpassed what current Star Trek is doing. So Alex Kurtzman and crew, they should aspire to be anything like the Orville at this point, because what they're peddling is just crap. This is so much better.
This episode was, I think, some of the best Star Trek, at least going back to Enterprise. And even with Enterprise, the only episodes I really cared for were the Mirror Universe ones. So if we're going back to proper Star Trek that's not Mirror Universe, this was probably the best episode since going back to Voyager.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm serious about that. This was really well done. A few nitpicky story ideas aside, the visuals in this were slickly done. They had action scenes in here and they were done well.
Mm-hmm.
The characters were behaving in a very interesting way. This was the best Star Trek that wasn't in a mirror universe going back to Voyager. And I'm standing by that. This was a really well done episode and the visuals were they were so wonderful to watch.
Yeah. And I think the reason is, again, the writer on this, there were two writers, one of whom was Brandon Braga, who we all know from Star Trek Voyager. And so no wonder it felt like a Voyager episode. It was an hour and a half long. And if that's how long it takes to tell a proper story, then that's how long they should make it.
Seth said this season was supposed to be mini movies as opposed to episodes of a TV series.
Mm-hmm.
This was the first thing this season that felt like a mini movie because we paused the video at like 20 minutes in and we couldn't believe we were 20 minutes into it. It felt like we were 5 minutes into it. This thing just chugged along really fast. It was an hour and 26 minutes. I think that was the running time.
Yeah.
It did not feel like that. It felt like it was, I mean, I wanted more. It was like a 50-minute episode is what it felt like to me.
Yeah, it felt like it was a regular television episode, an hour-long show, and it was not. Again, I mean, there's no commercial breaks or anything, so when you have an hour and 26 minutes, it's actually an hour and 26 minutes, as opposed to these days when you watch an hour show and you actually get 40 minutes because of all the commercials. So this was a breath of fresh air. I mean, this, as far as television right now goes, this is like the best stuff out there, and it's not even on broadcast TV. I mean, it's on Hulu, on a streaming service, and that's it.
Yeah, there were
at least in the States.
There were some action scenes in this, and I don't mean action. There were some spaceship scenes too, but I mean like in-person action scenes. This was well done. I mean, the choreography was well done. I mean, this had everything. It had action, it had visual effects, it had spaceships, it had personal moments. This is the episode, if somebody says, well, I don't know about the Orville, I tried it and I didn't like it. This is the episode you should show them, and show it on a big screen TV.
Yep. But back to the story. Those other Moclans snatched Topa. Bortis and Kelly finally realize Topa is missing. They search for her, and she's nowhere to be found on the colony because these Moclans have taken her. Ed finally realizes that something's wrong because he can't reach Kelly and Bortis. So he violates the agreement and enters the nebula with the Orville. And of course, this is the one and only time we hear from that horrible Charlie Burke, because she's like, oh, but if we go into the nebula, we'll be violating the agreement. Unfortunately, Ed's like, I don't care, we're going in anyway, shut up. Well, I wish he would have said that. So they go into the nebula anyway.
Well, but her being used like this, where she's just a bridge officer and has a couple of lines, that's fine. Her being used like this, I could live with. I still don't think she's a very good actor, but I could live with this. So even the Charlie Burke effect, I guess we'll call it, she was used correctly here. She had a couple of lines doing her job, and that was the end of it. We didn't hear any more from her.
Thank God. Ed confronts Havina because she's being all evasive, and he's like, I can tell that there's something you're not telling me. So she finally coughs up the information that she has been smuggling baby girls from Moclus again, and she had given Topa information to use for communicating with their contact person on Moclus. Ed tells Havina that she should go before the Union Council and then tell them what she's been up to so that they can investigate the Moclans and find Topa. And Havina initially refuses to do so. I can kind of see her point, because when it comes to Topa, yes, she put her in danger, and that was absolutely 100% wrong. However, don't the needs of the many kind of outweigh the needs of the few or the one? I'm just saying. When Havina refuses to cooperate, Ed has her escorted to the simulator, and she enters the simulator, and lo and behold, guess who's in there but her idol, Dolly Parton. And that was actually very interesting, because Dolly Parton, she gave Havina some advice. She told her this story about her own childhood. Then she explained to Havina that if you do the right thing now, the future will take care of itself. And that was the premise that Havina used to go in front of the council and admit to what she had done so that they could investigate the Moclans and find Topa.
The thing that struck me and why this felt more like proper Star Trek, that was good advice. That's good advice in this story, and it's good advice in your own personal lives. Unlike, and again, I don't want to use these reviews to just completely beat on Secret Hideout and CBS Star Trek, but the advice that they give in those shows are horrible advice, usually. Like 99% of the time, you do not want to follow anything Michael Burnham or Georgiou or any of those people are telling you, because that type of advice isn't going to lead to any useful output. So it was nice to actually get proper advice, good advice, in a Star Trek-like series again. And I think that's part of the reason why this felt like a Star Trek episode, because that's the kind of advice you should be getting in episodes like this, and in literature like this, and material like this. So that worked for me, and yeah, it was nice. It surprised me that she was in there, because I didn't see her name in the credits. When Dolly talks, she has a certain way of talking, which is kind of folksy type way. It landed better because of how she talks, the advice that she gave. At least for me, it did.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I've got a few things to say about that, because even at the time, again, because Topa's a child and she was just given this information, I mean, that does make a huge difference to me. But say this was Bortis in her place and he knew exactly what he was getting into, I think that it would have been a very different situation, and I think in that situation, Havina should have kept her mouth shut. Because again, as far as I'm concerned, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Well, that's how resistances work, though.
Yes, exactly.
If you get captured, you're probably going to sacrifice yourself. But if it's a child or a teenager, because I think Topa's probably at a teenage place now.
Yeah.
Well, that person couldn't consent to what they were doing.
No, which again comes back to, I think that was a very poor story choice, because we still could have had the same storyline, except it would have been, I think, a better story. Because again, I'm sick of having heroes torn down. That was a huge mistake for Havina, and I don't buy it for a second that she would have put Topa in that kind of danger. I just don't. That part of the story I disagree with, which is pretty much one tiny thing which I'm willing to overlook for the sake of the entirety of the story. But I'm still going to say I didn't like that part. But again, Havina, because Topa was a child, I'll overlook her putting the entire smuggling ring in danger just for one child. I mean, there's a lot to be unpacked with that, because, like Ed said before, if we don't do the right thing, then what exactly are we standing for as a union?
Yeah, he said that in the season 2 episode when they were debating that planet's fate in front of the council. That's what he stated out front. If we don't defend this situation and use our values to say this is wrong, then why do we even exist?
Exactly. Yeah. Again, there's a lot that can be discussed with what Havina did and then her ultimate decision. You know, we could talk about that for hours, but I'll just move on from there. So, Topa has been taken by the Moclans. Kelly and Bortis get to their shuttle and discover, oh, guess what? It's been sabotaged. Like, duh. I mean, what did you think was going to happen when you left it just sitting there with those jerky Moclans hanging around? Big surprise. So their screwed up shuttle that takes off like you're hitting the gas pedal in a drag race. Yeah, so they take off in that thing. They have no communications, so they can't tell the Orville what's going on. However, they can track the shuttle that Topa has been taken on. They have to follow that because they're losing the trail, so they don't have time to go back to the Orville and try to pick it back up again. So they just take their sabotaged shuttle and follow those Moclans who have Topa, and eventually they are taken to this Moclan black site, and that's where Topa is being questioned, and they're trying to torture the information out of her.
It was a pretty graphic torture, too. Again, that's part of the choreography. They were beating the crap out of Topa, and it looked like they were beating the crap out of somebody.
Yeah, they did a really good job on that. Kelly and Bortis down on that planet trying to get to the area where Topa is being held.
Before that, when they chose Kelly and Bortis, they were going to go on the mission, and Bortis was getting ready to take these big rifles and stuff, and Kelly reminded him, we can't do that. We can only take sidearms as part of the agreement. And then you find out that when they're in this shuttle that Bortis actually smuggled in some rifles. So it was funny.
Yeah, so they're down on the planet with those rifles, and Kelly's like, you weren't supposed to bring those. And then she's like, good job, because clearly they need them. Bortis was right. So that was good. Then there's this scene where they have to jump this ravine, and Bortis makes it. Kelly does not, and she ends up falling and injuring her shoulder. Bortis goes down to where Kelly is laying on the ground, and her shoulder is damaged. While the little healing device is on her shoulder, he's thanking her for basically being a part of his family and helping him with Topa. There's a moment where Kelly and Bortis almost kiss, which was interesting and hopefully something that they will unpack further later, because again, the implications for that would be huge, especially since Bortis is coming from a same-sex union, and that's all he's ever had from what we know anyway.
Was it a kiss, or they just...
No, they were going in for a kiss.
They were definitely connecting. I just didn't...
Remember what I told you about... when Isaac was sitting down, when Claire said, hey, sit down, I want to talk to you, I've missed you. And I'm like, oh shit, they're getting back together. At least she's going to try to. Remember what I said there and listen to me now. Bortis and Kelly were about to kiss.
Well, you did tell me yesterday when we were talking about this that situation reminded you of something else.
Yes, it did. It reminded me a lot of Worf and Deanna Troi and Alexander. I'm gonna just overlook that because, again, common tropes. You've got this single dad with a kid, and you bring in this woman who's being a mother figure to the child, and then the two parents end up together. In romance, that is a huge thing.
Well, the difference here, I mean, I agree with you, but the difference was, in The Next Generation, Worf sought out Deanna Troi's advice. In the Orville, it was Topa that was bonding with Kelly.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the episode, Bortis was talking to Kelly in the cafeteria, the mess hall, about Topa, and Topa's having trouble communicating. I guess Topa's having some issues with relationships because she likes some boy. And Bortis said something like, well, normally Clyden would handle stuff like this, which I thought was interesting because we knew Clyden wasn't this one-dimensional villain or two-dimensional villain, that we found out that Clyden and Topa did have a close bond, and they would talk about things like this. So I thought that was interesting. But anyway, so Bortis said something, I forget how it went, but Kelly suggested that maybe Topa would be more comfortable talking with a female. And then Bortis just immediately assumed, okay, well then you'll take care of this, thank you.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
And then Kelly's like, and then she eventually agreed. And then Bortis explained to her that Topa's learned to respect Kelly and use her as a mentor. So I think by him telling her that Kelly agreed to talk to Topa.
Yeah.
They set that up at the beginning as far as how Kelly was working more with Topa, because we saw that in earlier episodes. But I also thought it was interesting when Bortis mentioned that Clyden usually talked to Topa about these things. So, because all we usually see is Clyden just being a jerk. We figured, we talked about this when they had the big breakup.
Well,
that Clyden wasn't as
one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Well, because again, with Clyden, there was more in common with Topa than Topa realized, especially since Clyden had also been born female and undergone the surgery. So I think that there was a very strong bond there on Clyden's part that Topa didn't know about. And when Topa rejected being assigned male, that really hurt Clyden very deeply because that was like rejecting Clyden. I'm not excusing Clyden's behavior before as far as, I wish you were never born when he said that to Topa. But where that came from within Clyden, you can understand it because the birth of Topa was what Clyden himself had endured. It would cause Clyden to question his entire identity as well. And he was not prepared to do that. So he was angry at Topa for forcing the issue. Again, it's not an excuse, but from a psychological standpoint, you can see exactly how that would happen. But anyway, back to Kelly and Bortis. So they almost kissed. It was interrupted when the medical device on Kelly's shoulder beeped that she had been healed. So after that, they enter the Moclan Black site. They fight their way in, which was a really cool set of fight scenes.
They used strategy, too, because in one scene, Bortis was taking all this weapon fire, and Kelly went around to the back of these two people and took them out. So it wasn't just random shooting. They were using actual strategy to take out this much more numerous Moclan force down there. So that was fun to see. It was well done, well executed. Choreography was great. It was fantastic to watch.
Yeah, it was really good because Bortis was able to use his brute strength and Kelly was able to use her brain, and together they got the job done. It was such a fun watch. And it seemed very realistic, too, unlike a lot of those shows where you've got these scrawny, tiny little women beating up men 4 times their size. Yeah, that just, my suspension of disbelief is unable to suspend disbelief for that. No. So this was actually good. This seemed realistic. This was well choreographed, well thought out. Again, I mean, if you don't watch any other episodes of The Orville, just watch this one.
This has everything. Everything good about The Orville is in this episode. Because they even had some humor, because at the beginning of the episode, remember I mentioned how Bortis approached Kelly about Topa having a crush on somebody? Well, you find out that she actually had the crush on Gordon. And it was a little funny part of the episode where she approached Gordon and was trying to ask him out on a date. But Gordon didn't get it. So he's like, oh, yeah, you can talk to me about anything. I think if you like my little sister, it's all good. And then afterwards, when Gordon did finally figure out, and then Topa was disappointed and left, I think it was Lamar or something, was like making jokes, hey, nice job, Sherlock, or something. So there was even humor in here. So like this episode had everything.
Yeah, it did.
Topa was being interrogated. I don't know who the guy was under the makeup, but he was doing a really good job because that guy was a big jerk. And he was beating the crap out of Topa. And then he had this device that was a pain giver that would cause...
It was one of those krill pain givers, yeah.
And he was going to use that on her. I don't remember if he did use that on her.
Oh, he used it on her, yeah.
There were some, I mean, I don't want to say like gory graphic, but there was some really graphic things done to Topa here to try to get her to talk. The guy who they had playing the interrogator, I thought was really well cast. He had kind of that over-the-top persona to him, but it wasn't like cheesy. I mean, it was very menacing. You felt this guy meant business.
Yep. So Kelly and Bortis get there in the nick of time because Topa had just broke and given the information and they were about to kill her. And fortunately, Bortis goes in and, well, let's just say that one-eyed Moclan now has no eyes. Because Bortis took care of business, and that was one of the best things I have ever seen.
If anybody is familiar with The Expanse, and if anybody remembers the Amos, I am that guy, that was Bortis' moment here. I'm trying to remember, didn't he look up and after he saw Topa and said, like, you did this to my daughter? And then Kelly was trying to help Topa out, and you could see Bortis snap, grabbed the guy and threw him against the wall and started beating the crap out of him. And then he took that pain stick and he, like, jammed it in the guy's eye, and Kelly's, like, telling him to stop, and Bortis is just beating the crap out of him.
No, I mean, I don't think Bortis killed him, but...
No, he left him blind, though, because he only had one eye, and he jammed that thing in his eye real good.
Yeah, because finally Kelly commanded him to stop, and he finally did stop. Yeah, I'm not sure I would have stopped if I was...
And it was really, that choreography was well done. That was a well done fight scene. I mean, it was really well done.
Yeah.
And you could see Bortis snap because earlier in the episode, when they were first landing on the planet, and it was just supposed to be Kelly and Bortis on the planet. And then Topa said, oh, well, I want to meet my hero.
Yeah.
Can I come down with you? And Bortis was reluctant, but Kelly was like, well, you know, we'll keep an eye on you. It'll be fine. Well, when she came down and they were getting out of the shuttle, the Moclan contingency were like, when they saw Topa, they were making really negative comments about the freak that she was and all that. And like Bortis was getting up in their face because he was going to like start a fight with one of the guys, and then it eventually didn't turn into that. But then this was like the payoff to that because they already had animosity toward Topa at the beginning, the Moclans, and then this interrogator crossed the line. I mean, when Bortis beat the crap out of him, I mean, then normally I don't really like care for violence, but it was that Amos moment of I am that guy. Because if you know what I'm talking about in The Expanse, that guy had it coming to him as well.
Yep.
So like, yeah, I don't really care for violence, but this guy had it coming to him because the graphic nature that they showed Topa being tortured, he had this coming.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I have to say, the guy who plays Bortis, I'm afraid I don't know everybody's name. My sister's always getting on me, telling me, oh, blah, 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 was in this show and this show and this show. And I'm like, well, who did they play? Because I don't know anybody's name. But the guy who plays Bortis, he did an amazing job. This was a really well done...
Peter Mason? I think that's his name.
Is it?
I think so.
Oh, well, he did an excellent job. This was so well acted. This whole episode, as I said, there were a few writing choices that I didn't care for, but overall, this is the best episode of television I've seen in a very long time.
And that's through prosthetics. He has to do this. Again, I hate to go back to Star Trek Discovery, but when they put those people in those horrible Klingork outfits and masks, there was no way to emote at all. You just had this flat effect because of the horrible makeup job done on those Klingorks.
Yeah.
Whoever designed the Moclan prosthetics took into account that the actors are going to want to use facial contortions to present emotions. Peter, I'm pretty sure it's Peter Mason, he used that very well in this episode because you got full ranges of emotion from this guy through all that makeup, which just tells you how great of a job that he did because it was through makeup.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Meanwhile, back at Union Central, the council meeting is not going very well. Havina has admitted to smuggling again, and the Moclans are demanding that she's arrested and basically saying that they've done nothing wrong and there's no reason to believe that they have. And it seemed like the Union was going to let them get away with it yet again.
Again, because with them losing the Krill Alliance, they really, really, really need Moclus and their weapons in order to keep the Kalons at bay. So that was the dilemma here. But I guess the nice thing that we saw we got to see Bruce Boxleitner as the president again, so that was nice to see as well. There was some continuity there because in the Krill episode, we saw him as the president, and we got to see him again as the president, so that was nice.
Yeah, and there was a scene where Gordon basically called the Moclans assholes.
He said, "You let these assholes get away with stuff all the time." And again, he was kind of displaying that, going back to the beginning dialogue where he said he saw Topa as a little sister, and he was kind of coming across like a overprotective brother, or maybe not overprotective in this case, and saying, "You keep letting these assholes get away with stuff again and again and again, and they're just going to keep doing it." And you could see he was kind of digging his own hole, because like while he was doing that, the Captain Mercer was like giving hand gestures and face gestures to stop, like, "You're digging a hole here, dude."
Well, yeah, because Gordon even said, "I'm probably going to get court-martialed for this," but oh well. Gordon was right. I mean, you can't keep letting your supposed allies get away with human rights abuses like that and think that you're a moral society. I mean, you can't turn a blind eye just so that you can get what you need from this other group.
And again, going back to Star Trek Discovery, you know, I like the Dolly Parton when she gave that good advice. Well, this is the same type of thing. People were praising Georgiou in Star Trek Discovery, even though she was essentially Space Hitler. And Michael Burnham, starting that war, was being lifted up as this hero. It was nice to see the Orville start presenting the dialogue of, you can't keep doing bad things and still consider yourselves to be good, just people.
Yep.
At some point, you have to answer for your actions, and that's something that CBS Star Trek does not understand. The Orville has a moral center, just like Star Trek did.
Yeah.
And it was nice to see that in this episode.
Well, yeah, because it comes back to what Dolly Parton said. You know, you do the right thing now and the future will take care of itself. You could discuss that probably all day long, how accurate that is, or if that's just living in fantasy land. But,
I mean, you always have to look toward the future. You have to play a couple of moves ahead. But you got to have a balance there, because if you're not going to take care of the here and now, the future doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly what I would think too. Like I said, you can't just keep turning a blind eye to allies who are committing human rights abuses. You just can't. And still call yourselves a good moral society. You just can't, because you're not. Again, like you just said, comparing this to Kurtzman Trek, Star Trek Discovery, Picard, even Strange New Worlds, this is just head and shoulders above.
They have no moral center.
Yeah.
In their mind, everything is relativistic. It's just a different point of view, but, you know, it still can be okay if you just look at it from a point of view.
It's all relative. Well, again, I'm just going to say this. The attitude with Star Trek Discovery and that whole group over there, I swear, it's like you're listening to Voldemort. You know, there is no good and evil, there is only power.
From Harry Potter.
Yes. Because that's the kind of crap that Voldemort would spew. I disagree with that 100%. But that seems to be how they operate over there, and I want nothing to do with people like that.
That's why I can't watch their stuff. It's hard. I cannot watch the CBS Star Trek without severely making fun of it. There is no moral center. These people behind these shows try to get on some sort of moral high ground and talk down to people, but the messaging they're sticking out there shows they are not the moral superior to anybody.
No.
However, with the Orville, this episode demonstrated that there are lines you don't cross. There are things you have to do, even if they're not easy, if you're going to call yourself a moral people.
Yep.
This was well done. I mean, this episode had so much going for it. This whole thing with the Moclans and saying, going back to the synopsis here, going back to Gordon going, you can't keep letting these assholes get away with stuff and just keep lying and lying and lying. I understand we've got this Kalon threat, but at some point you have to say, is our safety really worth giving up who we are?
Yep.
And you could make, and I'm not going to go into it, but you could make a statement about that, what I just said there, and our current real-world politics, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yep.
But it was well done in the Orville.
Yep. So, anyway, what happens is, you know, the full council hearing is going on. It's not going well. Then Topa walks in, and that's it for Moclus.
Yeah,
because
they explain, too, just Topa got all beat up, and they're dragging her to the chamber. Like, they at least explain, Topa has refused medical treatment because she wanted the council to see what they did to her. So I like that little piece, because sometimes you for dramatic effect, you'll bring people into situations that it doesn't make sense. But in this case, it was explained that Topa refused medical treatment because she wanted the council to see what the Moclans did to her.
Yep. So Moclus is out of the Union now, and the colony of female Moclans is getting Union protection and being recognized as a sovereign state. And so they're going through having to basically do a breakup of all the military stuff, officers, equipment, etc., with Moclus and the Union. We'll see where it goes from there. But you know what? Moclus had it coming. You know, again, you can't just keep putting up with that crap and think that you're still a good person. You're not. They're not. And if you're condoning that crap, you're not either.
This was so well done. I mean, the way it was done, the way afterwards they explained the fallout, because you had 2 or 3 admirals sitting with Mercer and the rest, and they were trying to figure out the logistics of how they were going to break up the Moclans, because they had a lot of fleets they had Moclans integrated with Union, and so they had to figure out a way to break that up.
We had a scene where Havina basically acknowledged to Bortis that she could apologize to him, but it was highly unlikely that he was going to accept that apology, and he's like, "You're right, I wouldn't." And then he just walks away from her.
Well, it kind of felt to me, and again, I don't know where the character was going with this, but it felt like she was using that to try to still come up with an apology. And Bortis essentially shut her down and said, "Yeah, we're not doing an apology here."
Yep, exactly. And we didn't get a scene between Havina and Topa. That would have been interesting. However, Topa is in sickbay on the Orville. Claire is taking care of her, and we got a surprise. We got a surprise visitor for Topa.
Yeah, Tala came in sickbay and said, "You've got a visitor," and then
Clyden showed up.
Yeah.
So Clyden finally has pulled his head out of his ass and apologized for being such a jerk, and is back. And he is willing to change. In fact, he even apologized to Kelly and invited Kelly to join the family, him, Bortis, and Topa for dinner.
Well, he even apologized in sickbay to Topa for saying that he wished that she wasn't born, because that's what he said when they broke up.
Yep.
So the Clyden did a really good job, the actor, of showing that he really was a good parent. And I said at the beginning of the episode when Bortis explained how Clyden was the one that dealt with Topa with these personal issues as far as dating and that. And so that was an indication at the beginning that Clyden wasn't this villain that they portrayed him a few episodes ago. That doesn't mean what Clyden did was right. It wasn't right. But there was more going on than just him being a jerk.
Yeah.
And so it was nice when he was talking to Topa. You could see that loving parent there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about it, Clyden didn't find out that he was born female till after he and Bortis were married. You know, so again, the behavior change, the run toward orthodoxy that Clyden made was done after he and Bortis had fallen in love, gotten married. It was in that span of time between marriage and when Topa arrived that Clyden found out the truth. Was clearly struggling to deal with that, and his way of doing that was by doubling down on Moclan teachings. And at the end of this episode, we find out that Clyden and Bortis have renounced their Moclan citizenship. And that is a really big step for somebody like Clyden, who had fully embraced the Moclan teachings in order to try to find a way to live with the distressing fact that he'd been born female. And he hadn't been told about that by his parents. He found out from a Union doctor as an adult after he'd been married. So, a big step for Clyden, coming back, admitting that he was wrong, and renouncing his Moclan citizenship.
The scene where Bortis, Topa, and Clyden were having dinner, and then Kelly came in and gave an update. It was Clyden, because Kelly was getting ready to leave, and it was Clyden that asked Kelly if she wouldn't mind staying and having supper with them.
Yeah.
So Clyden is trying. Previously, Clyden wanted nothing to do with female officers, specifically Kelly, because he saw Kelly as interfering with the parenting of their child. But that was a big moment for Clyden to, on his own, because Kelly would have been fine leaving and nobody, even Bortis, wouldn't have thought anything less. She gave the information and she was leaving. So the fact that Clyden went out of his way to say, "Hey, do you want to have supper with us?" that was actually a big deal.
Yeah, it was. So I don't know if we'll see any more growth from Clyden this season. It would be nice if we did, because I would be interested to see how Bortis, Clyden, and Topa deal with Clyden basically coming out as having been born female. That would be very interesting, especially now that we see that Bortis may not be 100% exclusively male-oriented when it comes to his relationships.
Well, I just hope they don't make it a love triangle.
Oh, I hope not.
Because I really don't want to see that. We'll see where it goes, but that's my only concern. Is they're going to make this some sort of love triangle, and Kelly's going to... I guess they could try to do that, and then maybe Kelly could come full circle, and Kelly could realize that she destroyed her own marriage by doing this type of thing, and that she wasn't going to do that for breaking up Bortis and Clyde.
Yep.
So maybe it's going to come around to something like that.
Yeah, so we'll see where that comes to. But I'll be very interested to see what happens with Clyden from here, because obviously Clyden is going to have to make some decisions. Number one is going to have to be admitting that he was born female. Number two is going to be, does he stay that way? So I'll be interested to see if that does get addressed this season or not. This was the best episode of the Orville I've ever seen.
Yeah, this was some of the best science fiction we've seen in like the past 10 years. This was really well done. The story wasn't the same, but this was on par quality-wise of like an Expanse episode.
Yeah.
And that's saying something because I really do like The Expanse. I'm not saying it was copying an Expanse story or that it was doing anything like The Expanse. I'm just saying the Expanse level quality of presentation and writing over the past 10 years, that's like the Cadillac of, if that's even a thing anymore. Again, I'm the old man. But that was the Cadillac of science fiction storytelling over the past decade. This episode was on par with an Expanse episode, and that's how good it was. I want to mention my one nitpick. It's a little bit different than yours. So when they were leaving the torture center, or the interrogation center, well, when they first entered the atmosphere of the interrogation center, they cloaked their shuttle. And then when they were escaping, the ship was cloaked and they uncloaked it so they could get into it. Then they were escaping and these other Moclans were chasing them. At no time did they think about re-enabling the cloaking device. I went back and listened to the dialogue. I thought maybe they would explain, or maybe it got damaged. They didn't explain any of that. So there was this really cool chase scene after they were leaving in the shuttle, and these Moclan fighters were chasing after them in this canyon. And it was really well done. I mean, the visual effects were really well done. In my mind, I had to come up with the idea of, well, maybe when they're escaping at full speed, the cloak doesn't work as well, or because they didn't start firing back. Because at first it was like, well, maybe it's kind of like the Romulans and they can't fight while they're cloaked. But they didn't decide to fight until they realized they couldn't escape, because I rewatched the chase scene. So that was my nitpick. If anybody knows why they didn't enable the cloaking device, do let me know, because that was like my one big, took me a little bit out of the story when they did that. I think even your mother mentioned, why don't they just make the ship invisible? And I had no good answer for her. But the visual effects, when they were on that planet, the Moclan female planet, and there were these fireflies, these different colored fireflies, that visual effect was really, really, really well done. The nebula around the planet was really, really well done. I have so much positive things visually to say about this episode. This was a demo reel for 2022 visual effects.
Yeah, there were some shots of the exterior of the Orville. It was just beautiful. I mean, the ship was gorgeous. I wish all TV shows right now were using this same level of CGI, because this looked so good. It didn't look like a video game. It didn't look like crap. It looked beautiful.
Yeah, as I said in the beginning of this video, watch this video, but don't watch it on your phone. This is one of these episodes you want to see on a big screen.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And as you can tell, I'm giving a high recommendation. This is the highest level of Orville that I've ever seen. So this is Star Trek. Last week, I was complaining, if you're going to do drama and you're going to step up to the plate, you better get a piece of the ball. This week, not only did they get a piece of the ball, they hit it out of the ballpark. This is Star Trek. This is the episode you show people and say, this is why I watch this show.
Yep. Yeah, I give it a 9 out of 10 just because of the whole wrecking of Havina's character. But I otherwise really enjoyed this episode.
This is why we complain about the lesser episodes, because we said we know they can do better than this.
Yes.
And this episode proves us right. They darn well can do a lot better than what they had been doing, and we just got to see it.
Yep. Yeah. They should do this every week. Every week do this. And there will be very little for us to complain about.
However you have to get a hold of this episode, Go through Hulu if you can. They can track your watching and show there's a want to watch more of this. But for whatever reason, if you can't do Hulu, find whatever way possible to get a hold of this episode and watch it on a big screen TV. This is the episode you want to watch this season.
Yep, definitely.
What did you guys think of this episode? Did you agree with us? Do you think this is the best Orville that's been done? Do you agree with us that this is finally Star Trek? Feel free to put that in the comments. And if you have any other ideas about stuff that we missed, or maybe a different interpretation of how we looked at some of the story ideas, share that with us too, because we do enjoy replying to those. And a lot of times you get us to think about the way we were looking at things.
And I love thinking. It's my number one pastime, thinking. So, yep. I look forward to your comments. Definitely share, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, because we really, really, really want to get to 1,000 subscribers so we can get monetized and we can actually dedicate more time to working on the channel, do more shows, etc. Like, comment, subscribe, share us off. We'll be here doing this again next week.
Take care.